Welcome back, everybody. We've got Johnny Winter. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and he's going to talk about, I guess, from the title, Dynamic Measures in Power BI. Welcome to the stage.
Nothing gets past Ben. Cool. Thanks very much. So first of all, thanks very much for having me. Thanks for Robert Walters for hosting. Thanks for you guys for turning up, and for all the guys online for tuning in. And thank you, Augustine, for the presentation on the good, bad, the ugly, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So yeah, I'm here to talk to you about dynamic measures in Power BI. Is my clicker working? Not yet. So the about me, the boring bit. Talk about myself. Alex already did a great job already at the top of the show, but I currently work as a data analytics consultant for a company called Waterstones. That is not the bookshop. We are a business and IT consultancy with offices in the UK and Australia. I have personally worked with business intelligence software for since 2007. So I think that pips Augustine. I think he said 13 plus years. I'm at 15, which makes me feel really, really old. I know it's 2007 because somewhere in my house, I have a certificate that tells me I did a 2-day Crystal Reports training. So anyone remembers Crystal Reports? Does anyone still have to use Crystal Reports? Thank God, cool. So yeah, cut my teeth with Crystal Reports. My last 6 years has focused more on Microsoft technologies. So my group of friends now refer to this as vintage BI, which is kind of SQL Server, integration services, analysis services, reporting services. That's kind of what I was doing 5 or 6 years ago. Nowadays, I get to do the sexy stuff. So I get to, there's only me that calls it sexy, by the way, but I get to use the cloud stuff. So like Data Factory, Data Bricks, Synapse Analytics, and of course, Power BI, which is personally my absolute favorite. I love working with Power BI. Like Augustine, I had the version with the green logo. I've like literally used it that long. It was a bit rubbish when it had a green logo. It didn't have date slices. It was terrible. But yeah, I've been using it for donkeys. I'm fanatical about it to the point where I like my day job as a data analytics consultant. But in my spare time, I have my own website. So gracefulanalytics.com. I've got a blog there which you can check out. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Most of my Twitter content is just bad banter, to be honest, but give me a follow. There's the odd good meme. I have a YouTube channel, so like and subscribe. And I've got myself a page on LinkedIn. It is just a hobby. Like quite a few people think that I'm like my own consultancy, and I'm not. It's just me and a blog and a YouTube channel. So I'm actually here to talk to you about dynamic measures. So what is a dynamic measure? Because I don't think it is a phrase or terminology that you'll find in Microsoft documents. It's not like an official Power BI feature. Potentially, it's just a term that I've made up. So when I talk about a dynamic measure, the best thing to do is to show you what I mean. So here we go. Power BI report for you. I've got in my report a nice graph showing trend over the last 12 months. Got myself a card in the top right-hand corner. Apologies to Augustine, my card does not show context, it's just plain text. So Augustine will have to tell me off for that. If I click on this particular measure, it's literally got just this one measure inside it, which I've called dynamic measure inventively. And likewise for my graph, if I click that, I'm showing it by calendar year month. I've got my measure selection in my legend, and there's just literally one measure being displayed on the graph. Up here, I've got a slicer. If I select from my slicer, I can dynamically change the contents of my measure, hence the phrase dynamic measure. So by selecting from this slicer here, dynamically changes what DAX is being executed under the hood, and changes how the graph looks and what information is displayed. So that's the what. Why would you want to implement this? First reason, it's cool, isn't it? You know, that's pretty nifty. Just like show off to your friends how great you are at Power BI. More seriously, why is it useful? So this is the bit that dovetails really, really nicely with Augustine's presentation, because one of the things he said is from a performance perspective and from a quality of presentation perspective, throwing too many measures onto your canvas, you're going to potentially confuse your users because there's just too much information to try and process. There's a performance hit potentially because for every single visual that's on that canvas, it's going to execute DAX in the background, and there's like a performance hit that does that. So by introducing this as a feature, you can show like multiple measures on one page, but at the same time only do one at a time. So it's like simpler potentially for your users to be able to get their head around it, but also hopefully improve some performance and save some room as well, because the standard page on a Power BI report isn't that big. So that's the why. Now, I like to keep these things interactive. So if you are logged on at home, assuming you're at home, give us a quick hands up if you have implemented a feature like this before, and in the room, anybody done it? Oh, someone said half. You can't decide whether you've done it or not. Okay, so like, never mind the how, I guess more the kind of feature-wise you have, right? Cool, awesome, brilliant. And yeah, definitely got a few hands up from home, awesome, good stuff. Even if you have done this before, I'm hoping that from this evening's session, there's still going to be some stuff you can learn. I'm hoping I can sort of give you some tips, understand some limitations and things like that. So we've covered the what and the why. Next, how, right? And the answer to that is there are different techniques you can use. I'm going to say, so I'm going to demonstrate three different ways to do it tonight. And I want to take you through the pros and cons and limitations of those ways of doing it. So the first one I am going to describe as the disconnected table with a switch measure technique, which is obviously really, really catchy and easy to remember. So what do I mean by that? So first of all, when I say a disconnected table, I mean that in my data model, it is a table that doesn't actually have any relationship to the rest of my model. Let's get some more screen estate going on. Rubbish. Yeah, so I've got a, this is the Contoso data set. I've got a simple sales model going on here. I always use a disconnected table for my measures. And then to implement my dynamic measure, I've created this disconnected table down here as well. So it doesn't have any relationship to the rest of my model. If I look in the data view, I can have a look at what that table looks like. So we've got in there, the table contains a list of the measures I want to include in my dynamic measure. What I've also done is I've implemented a sort order. In this fictitious example, because I've made it up, I like to include a sort order. And my fictitious reason for that is that I want the most important KPIs to display first in my list. So I'm saying, right, revenue is the most important thing that I want people to concentrate on. You know, in your scenario, if you look to implement this, you know, there might be something else that you see as the first thing that you want people to look at. So I've put the sort order in there. Now, you've got a couple of different ways that you can implement that measure. So you could create a DAX table, use a DAX calculation and insert rows into that if you wanted to. The way I've done it, because this is my preferred method, I find it easier, is you have the enter data option here and you literally click that and you can enter whatever you like in here. That kind of thing. And then if you want to put extra columns, things like in there. So that's how I've created my disconnected table. Cool. And it's using that disconnected table that I've populated my slicer with. So the other thing that you need then is the switch measure. So if I come and look at my dynamic measures table here, click on my dynamic measure, and this is your DAX. So first I've created a variable and I'm passing to that variable which measure has been selected from my slicer. Then we get to the bit that is the switch measure bit, which is basically tell me what's been selected if somebody's selected sales revenue, then display the sales revenue measure. If someone's selected the cost measure, display that. If someone's selected the margin, display that. If nothing's selected, just return a blank. So that is how the first technique works. And it works pretty well. Like, it's quite slick, pretty responsive, does exactly what I need it to do. This technique, so, okay, show of hands again, because I like to keep it interactive. Who has implemented this feature using this technique before? Cool. Sure, more people put their hands up then than the first time. But cool, we're good, we're good. Right, this technique does potentially have some limitations. So let's get rid of this. This is like a spot the difference competition at this point. So this version of my report is slightly different. I have switched up which measures I want to include. So rather than displaying my revenue, my cost and my margin, I'm now going to show my revenue, my unit quantity and my margin percentage. Let's have a look what happens. So sales revenue, we're all good. That looks exactly how I expected it. Sales unit quantity, okie doke. So unit quantity isn't a monetary value, it's not a currency, and it's still displaying as a currency, right? Margin percentage just looks bizarre. My margin percentage is £1. If we look over on the axis over here, 56p, it makes no sense. The kind of easiest way to sort of demonstrate that is showing it in a matrix instead. So I can pull my measure selection on and display all three measures at the same time. And my limitation effectively is that dynamic measure I can only specify one data type for. You know, when you create a measure, you can say how do I want it to display. Do I want it to display in as a currency or as a whole number or as a percentage? I can't mix and match it. So technique number 2 out of 3, I have got another measure over here, which I have inventively called dynamic measure formatted. Cool. So if we check out the DAX for this, on first glance, it looks very similar. It fundamentally does the same thing. We're telling it to pass the selected value from the slicer. The bit that's different is that for each return value in our switch measure, we've wrapped it in a format string. So we're going to say that, right, for sales revenue, if I return the sales revenue measure, display it in currency. If I'm returning unit quantity, display it as integer. And if I'm displaying margin percentage, do it as a percentage. So I'm going to chuck this onto my matrix. Awesome, we're getting the result we want now. So revenue has been displayed in currency, unit quantity in integer, sales margin, percentage, winning. So let's go back to our front page. And what I can do is I'm going to swap out measure there for the formatted version. And if I quickly change that up, you'll have to excuse the fact it doesn't quite fit, but you can tell that it is at least displaying the right type. Good times. And then if I go down here to my graph, I'm going to remove dynamic measure from there. I'm going to bring my formatted measure here. I'm going to bring my format. Won't let me add it to the graph, right? Okay, doke. Why is that? Basically, once we wrap that DAX in a format string, we're converting it to text. So at the point at which you've converted it to text, you can't plot it on a graph. You can't, it doesn't understand like what order to plot the data points in because it's text and you don't add text together. So I guess option 1 works well if all the measures you want to display can be the same format. Option 2 is okay if you're looking to display the information graphically. So if you're using a table or a matrix or a card, your good times, you can wrap it in a format string. Option 2 works well. Brilliant. So what about option 3? Is there a third way? I feel like I sound like Tony Blair then. So is there a third way? And yeah, the answer is, of course, yes, there is. So the third way on here. There we go. The third way is to use a calculation group. Who is familiar with what a calculation group is? Cool. Okay, a few people in the room. Happy days. Calculation groups are a feature that were brought into our analysis services in 2019, I think. But in terms of being able to use them in Power BI, it's only been an option since they've opened up Power BI to be able to use external tools, which I think is 18 months, 2 years-ish, thereabouts. One problem is that you can't implement them natively inside Power BI Desktop. You've got to use a third-party tool to do it. And that third-party tool is Tabular Editor. I believe you can do it with Visual Studio as well. I've got no idea how. I've only ever seen it implemented using Tabular Editor. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete this. Delete from model. Am I sure? Yeah, I'm sure. So I've deleted that disconnected table. I've broken all my visuals. Don't worry, we're going to fix it. So I'm going to go to my external tools room. Where I work at Watson's, very, very fortunate that they pay for me to have a Tabular Editor 3 license, because Tabular Editor 3 is awesome. This isn't my work laptop, so we're slumming it with Tabular Editor 2. But also, I guess that demonstrates the fact that you can implement this without having to pay for the licensed version of the tool. You can use the free open source version for this as well. Again, I guess that this becomes one of the drawbacks to this technique. You have to use a third-party tool. Some organizations get twitchy about you installing open source software or using these third-party tools. What I would say, if you work for an organization like that, speak to the people who make those decisions and write the business case that says, look, from a Power BI development perspective, to get the maximum out of the product, you need to be using these third-party tools. So whatever process you need to go through to get that signed off and approved, go for it. It doesn't just help you implement these extra features like calculation groups, it gives you other advantages from a productivity perspective. So there's like features in it that can help you automate tasks and all that kind of thing. Anyway, implementing option 3 using a calculation group. The way to add a calculation group. So I'm going to come over to my Object Explorer on the left-hand side. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to go to Create New, Create Calculation Group. Now, one of the things that I need to do to make sure that I can fix all my visuals when I load this back is use the same naming conventions that I already had. So my disconnected table was originally called Dynamic Measure with an @ sign. I have a weird convention in my models. Whenever I have a disconnected table, I like to prefix it. I always use that symbol. For me, it just differentiates in your model from a user interface perspective, the fact that this isn't part of the model itself. It's for almost like config purposes and a slightly different feature. So created my calculation group. By default, you'll have a column that will display all those calculation items called name. Again, I want to change that. Called measure selection. Sorted. Next thing I'm going to add to this is my dynamic measure. So I'm going to add a measure to the table. Call that dynamic measure. And the DAX for that, I want to be the default value. And my default value was blank. So okay, right. Next thing I need to do is actually add the calculation items. So to add a calculation item, I hope everyone can see it all right. So what we'll do is going to right click on the calculation items. Add a new calculation item. So I want my first calculation item to be sales revenue. So if somebody selects this calculation item, show the revenue. Okay. and I need the DAX for that up here in the expression editor. So I can type out the DAX if I want. The quicker and easy way to do it is I can literally drag and drop it from my pane over here. So if I select this calculation item, display this measure. Right, I need to add the other two now. If I manage to spell all these right first time when I've got a room full of people watching me, I'm going to celebrate with a beer at the end of the night. There we go. So I've got calculation group created, dynamic measure created, 3 calculation items added. I need to save that back to my model. And I can now close Tabular Editor. If you implement a calculation group in Power BI Desktop, it'll ask you to refresh it. And magic, all of my measures have come back. Oh, I got a round of, yes, one person clapped. Thank you, Ben. Awesome. So a couple of issues here. First of all, that all important sort order, I wanted my revenue to appear first and I've lost my sort order. So that's not sort of implemented that correctly. Okie doke. What else? Margin percentage. Okay, so that's still not presenting as a percentage, which I wanted to. So I've lost my sort order. My formatting still isn't sorted. There's one other weird thing happening here. I don't know if anyone can spot it, but if I click sales revenue, changes my dynamic measure here. Easy enough for me to say. But I also had these this multi-card down here, and all of these have changed as well. So these are all now showing, even though one's formatted as currency, one's integer, and one's percentage, they're all showing the same figure. Again, yeah, the unit quantity, it does all of those. The margin percentage, it shows the same in each one as well. By default, if you create a calculation group and you select it, it will apply that DAX calculation to all of your measures. So you have to bear that in mind when you implement it. So good news is I'm going to go and fix all of this now. So let's open Tabular Editor again. And I'm going to fix these backwards, I think, because that's just the way I am. So sales revenue first. We don't want this to apply to all of our measures. We want this to only apply specifically to our dynamic measure. So I'm like really nervous that my copy and paste foo is going to desert me. This will fail miserably. Cool. So what I've done now is I've now wrapped my DAX calculation in an if statement. So I'm basically now saying that if the measure I'm using is dynamic measure and I select this calculation item, then use the sales revenue. Otherwise, just ignore it and whatever the selected measure is. So this is now basically pinning this calculation specifically to the dynamic measure. So that sorts out that issue where it was just changing every measure that was on there. Formatting wise, what can I do to make sure that I get the right formatting for each one? So in the expression editor, there's an option here for format string expression. And what I can do is if I grab this handily prepared code already. This follows a similar pattern. So basically I'm saying for my dynamic measure, if somebody selects the sales revenue calculation item, format it as a currency, otherwise just use the format string for whatever the other measure is. So this should sort out my formatting. Now, you have to excuse me really quickly whilst I apply these to my other measures too. For the sales margin. So that should sort out first two issues. It should make sure that I'm only going to apply these calculation items to my dynamic measure, and I'm going to sort out my my format strings as well. So the third issue was the order everything appears in. Now, the order that calculation items appear in is controlled by a property called ordinal, which you can see down here in the properties. And by default, it sets all the calculation items to -1. So if you want to change the order, you can change that property. It is starts from 0. So your first item will be 0, and then 1 and 2 and so forth. You can edit it there in the properties if you want. The quicker and easier way to do it is you can literally drag and drop it on the side. So if I drag my sales revenue to be top of my list, you'll see that automatically my ordinal here has changed. So that should be my sort order sorted. So if I save this back to my model and close this and hit refresh and hope to the demo gods I did everything right, and I think I have. So let's check this out. Sales revenue, I'm now showing as a currency up here. My axes are showing currency as well. In my card on the right, I've got the right measures against the right labels, so it hasn't just like magically changed everything. Unit quantity, happy days, I'm now showing an integer. Sales margin, I'm now showing a percentage. So awesome. Option 3 basically sorts out all of the shortfalls of options 1 and options 2. It gets better. This is the exciting bit. This is the bit that I like the most. Before, when I was extolling the virtues of Tabular Editor and how awesome it is in terms of productivity hacks and being able to do things much quicker, one of those productivity features is the ability to script out tasks. So if you've got something you want to do that's a repeatable task, you can write a script for it and it will just do it for you automatically. I have written a script that basically means that you don't have to suffer the pain of me sitting there for 10 minutes and typing. So sorry for putting you through all that pain, but I'd like to sort of demonstrate the workings behind it. I'm starting here from blank. So literally on my right hand side of my fields pane, you'll see there's no disconnected table there. There's no calculation group there. I'm going to go to my external tools and open Tabular Editor again, which always pops up on the wrong screen. I am going to go onto the Tinterwebs and go to GitHub. So I have a Grayscale Analytics GitHub repository, and I've got a dynamic measures repo, and I've got a script here, dynamic measure calculation group script. I'm not going to walk you through what everything in the script does. I've put loads of comments on it, so if people want to go and unpick it and have a look at it, hopefully it's kind of self-explanatory and it is available publicly. I'm going to hit the copy button in the top right-hand corner. I'm going to go back to Tabular Editor. I'm going to pick Advanced Scripting, and I'm going to paste my script in there. I am going to hit the execute button on this, and the first thing it's going to do is going to error. It's going to say I need to select one or more measures. So all I need to do is decide which measures I want to include. So far tonight, I've only included 3 measures on my slicer, basically because if I were to sit here and type out 5, it would have doubled the length of the presentation and everyone would have gotten bored and gone home by now. Because this is all click of the button stuff, I am going to, like living on the edge, like I like to select all 5 of my measures and then execute the script. Now, what happens first is you'll get some dialog boxes pop up. What do you want to call your calculation group? This is my script, so the defaults are set to the values that I like. So my calculation group is going to be called dynamic measure, but this is totally editable. So if you've got a preferred naming convention, you can go with that. It's really annoying. These dialog boxes keep popping up on the wrong screen. Awesome. What do I want to call the column for selecting my measure? Measure selection, great. And what do I want to call my actual dynamic measure? Call it dynamic measure. Hit OK. As if by magic, over here, all of a sudden, all of that work I just showed you is now magically done. The only thing that the script can't do is sort out the sort order. So that ordinal, we don't have a way to specify which order we want these things to apply in, but that's okay because I showed you how easy it is already to simply drag and drop. Oh, or did I? There we go. So sales revenue to the top. So if I save this back to my model now and close Tabular Editor, close GitHub as well, refresh my model, and we can see my dynamic measure has popped up here. Now let's magically build our report. So I need to do my measure selection. There we go, and a slicer. I'm going to change the orientation because I like it like that. Let's make it a bit shorter, and then I'm going to chuck on my area graph. I'm going to stick in that year month. Yep. Let's make it look pretty because everyone likes pretty reports. Sweet. And so literally within, I don't know, a couple of minutes, I've gone from not being able to implement this feature to a few button clicks and I'm away, and we can see that my revenue and my cost, margin and sales margin all works as we'd expect, and we get all the nice things that we wanted. So that is my option 3. Use a calculation group, use the script that automates it for you and does all of the hard work. Let's save. Okay, so the end, in theory. I agreed to do this at last month's user group, and I did all my prep, and I did my slides, and I did my example reports, which I think they looked all right. I was like, put some effort into them. They were okay, weren't they? And then in the last month, there's been a few things happen in the Power BI world. So we've had the Power BI Global Summit, which is an online Power BI event. We also had SQL Bits, which is an in-person event down in London. I was really fortunate enough, again, because Watsons are awesome and they paid for it all, to go to SQL Bits in London. At the Global Power BI Summit, Will Thompson, who's the product manager for Power BI, did the keynote speech, and he announced in it new features coming to Power BI. That new feature is dynamic measures coming natively to Power BI desktop. So, like, I'm going to take Augustine's lead here because he swore on his presentation. At this point, I shit the bed. I was like, oh, for God's sake, I've got this talk coming up. It's the first time I've done a talk at a user group as well. This is all out the window. Patrick LeBlanc from Cube was at SQL Bits. He demonstrated that new functionality as well. I can't remember what the title of the talk was, but I didn't go to it. I was probably at some boring data governance thing that my boss made me go to. My boss is in the room, by the way. So I've not actually seen it, but I've heard lots of people talk about it, and I got to speak to some of the guys from Microsoft whilst I was there. So it's coming natively to Power BI Desktop. So does that mean that you've just wasted half an hour or nearly half an hour listening to me? Few things. First of all, it's not going to be released in desktop until at least, and because it's not confirmed on the roadmap yet, so we don't know exactly when it's going to be, but it's not going to be till at least the end of May, and even then it's going to be in preview. So again, sometimes using preview features in sort of production reports isn't the best thing to do. So, you know, even though when it does get released in preview, you might not still want to use that native technique. So at least I've got maybe another month or so of getting mileage out of doing this talk. Yeah, Augustine's invited me to do his user group next week, and I'm like, cool, I don't need to think of another idea, or I'll redo my material. Fantastic. The second thing with that is, as yet, we don't know what the limitations are going to be with that. I've heard rumors. So people have said that it's limited to 3 items. Apparently there's like a UI that you set it up. The feature is not going to be called dynamic measures. It's going to be called value parameters. So basically you set up a parameter to change a value. And the UI apparently is limited to 3 items. So when I did my my examples and I did only use 3, great. But then at the end, I was like, oh, look, I can do 5 at a click of a button. So does that make my thing better than the Microsoft thing? The other rumor I've heard is even though the UI only supports 3 items, the code it generates allows you to then manually insert extra ones on top of that as well anyhow. So that might not be a limitation. So I guess to an extent, we wait and see. Maybe this will still be useful, and at least for the next couple of months, fingers crossed it will be. But native dynamic measures or value parameters are coming to Power BI Desktop.